Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RotoPros MLB DFS pre-lock show for Friday, April 27th, 2018. Today we will be covering the massive 14-game slate on hand. And as always, start out with weather. I don't think there's too many major weather concerns, just some light rain. And Cleveland has some, light rain, I guess, 50%. Austin, a couple scattered showers, but other than that, it looks pretty clear for all 14 games to play. So we'll start at pitcher. Matt, has anything changed since last night?
Not really. And there's not too much weather to talk about, so I'll just kind of mention where the weather might have an impact. The wind is blowing in one game and out in one game. So the helping wind game is in Kansas City. So the over-under in that game has gone up a little bit from 8.5 to 9. And it looks like it's just because the wind is blowing out a little bit. We weren't really considering Ronaldo Lopez and Danny Duffy anyway. So I don't know. That's probably not really impactful for what we're doing. The one that is more impactful is the wind is blowing in Boston, and that's a boost to both pitchers, especially Drew Pomeranz. So, yeah, at pitcher, Pomeranz is still – I think he's my favorite pitcher, although there's not any one guy tonight that I'm going to have too much more than anyone else. So it's the same three pitchers. I guess the priorities are Strasburg and Pomeranz. Last night I had probably talked more about DeGrom than Strasburg. It kind of depends what offense you're using, but I still definitely like DeGrom, Strasburg, Pomeranz. I think Pomeranz is the riskiest of those because he's a little walk prone and he's not as good, but he's cheaper and he gets a lot of strikeouts and it's a good matchup. So yeah, it's Pomeranz and Strasburg primarily, with DeGrom almost as much as those guys. And I do think you can mix in Corey Kluber, but I'm probably not going to use much of him, if any. So are those the same pitchers you're looking at?
Yeah, those are the exact three that I'm going to be rotating. I don't think I'm going to want to be heavier on any, certain one. I think I'm going to be just about even, rotating the different stacks we like with the different combinations of the pitchers we like. So it'll, aim to have about 2/3 of each of those pitchers.
So Logan's asking about Dallas Keuchel. I don't really have interest in Keuchel tonight. The line movement there is a little worrisome. The over-under's gone up from 8.5 to 9, and it looks like sharper money is on the Oakland side. There's a bit of a public bias towards Houston. Keuchel just hasn't been that good this year, and he generally doesn't get a lot of strikeouts anyway. The A's lineup this year against lefties, I think, should be better than last year because they acquired Stephen Piscotty. They're playing Chad Pinder and Mark Canha more. They have a lot of right-handed bats, and Matt Olson, if he's playing, is going to be the only lefty in the lineup. He actually sometimes sits against lefties. So it could be an entirely right-handed lineup. I don't really view this as too strong of a matchup for Keuchel. I think it's a pretty neutral one. His price is just kind of fair, so I don't hate Dallas Keuchel as a play, but those other three, maybe four pitchers that we already like, I think Keuchel is just behind them a decent amount.
Yeah, I agree with you. Did you touch on Marcus Stroman? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
No, so I don't really have much interest in Stroman because I like Pomeranz a lot more for a similar price. I'm not even sure that Stroman's a better pitcher at all than Pomeranz. It's a harder matchup. The Texas offense probably a bit better than the Rays, although it's really hard to gauge here because you can't really look too much at the early season numbers when teams are rotating their players so often. Texas is now playing without Adrian Beltre. They have guys in the lineup tonight that haven't played too much this year. Let's see if we actually have a Rangers lineup. DeShields hasn't played much this year. I think he's going to be a decent hitter. The Rays do get Matt Duffy back tonight, which is tougher on Pomeranz. It's just that I think Pomeranz is going to strike out a lot more batters than Stroman this year. Stroman's not as much of a strikeout pitcher, and I am concerned that Stroman has a 50% hard contact rate. He's throwing slower, so he might just be off in some way. Sharp money is betting Texas more heavily than any other team tonight. And I think it could be because Stroman is potentially pitching hurt. So, yeah, I don't like Stroman really at all. There are a lot of pitchers priced in the 6,000s, though, where I think there's a case for them. Stroman is one of those guys, but I I probably won't use anyone in that price range. So if you had to use someone in the 6,000s, would Stroman be your favorite pitcher there? Because I think there might be one or two other ones I prefer.
Yeah, I think I would choose Stroman. Maybe Blake Snell for upside, but the matchup is very tough as we know. And Luis Castillo is the guy we've always liked, but hasn't come full circle yet. And 6.3K seems a bit too low of a price for a pitcher of his caliber. And the Twins, aren't necessarily they are kind of lefty heavy, but they're not the scariest lineup. I'm assuming Castillo would be your favorite guy in that price range.
He's right up there. I think it is Blake Snell. Snell is just so much better of a pitcher than anyone priced around him. His numbers this year are just really, really good. So it's for Snell's price, like his baseline should be 8, maybe 9,000, maybe even higher than that. His strikeout rate is above 10 batters per 9 innings. His swinging strike rate is in the 13s. He was really good in the second half of last year. He's one of the most highly regarded prospects, or was one of the most highly regarded prospects in baseball pretty recently. Like, I think this is a top of the rotation starter that's priced way down for the matchup, and I think a little bit too far. So I probably won't use Snell much because we can just pay up more for pitching. The offenses we like aren't too expensive. But if you need a cheap pitching choice, I think Snell is the best bet for GPPs. I don't really think Stroman is that safe because he's been getting hit really hard this year. He's not throwing as hard. His walk rate is way up. So it's risky for Snell in a tough matchup, but I actually think it's really risky for Stroman too. So Snell is the guy I would use if you want to go really cheap at pitching, but I don't think Castillo is a bad option either, especially if you're playing for the correlation with the Reds offense, which I guess we'll get to because, yeah, that's probably it for pitching.
Yeah, that's about it for pitching. So let's move to offense. Let's keep it simple and straightforward here. Chris Tillman is on the mound. He's, probably the worst pitcher in the majors at this point. It's still shocking that he's in the starting rotation. He's, very bad. The Tigers are clearly the number one offense that, we want to target. They are a bit, priced up because of the matchup. So do you think the Tigers are going to be the team you're, most exposed to?
Well, let me we got a question on YouTube also. Let me just cover one more thing for pitching for 1 second, then I'll come back to the Tigers. The Arizona and Washington game is seeing some really strong sharp money on the under. So that game is getting a lot of betting on the over, and the total is just kind of staying at 7. It's a really low over-under. I don't think Zach Godley is going to be nearly as good as last year. He's not throwing as hard. He's been a little worse. That side of the game is just a fade, I think. The Nationals aren't priced down for the matchup or anything. Let me just see if I can get their lineup quickly because someone asked about them. Yeah, Harper's expensive. Turner's expensive. Zimmerman is still kind of just priced where he's been priced. I don't really have interest in offense there, but the reason that I like Strasburg more, I guess just giving it more thought, but the other reason is that Alex Avila is out of the lineup. Jeff Mathis is catching for Arizona tonight, and Jeff Mathis is basically a defense-only player. So it's a lot worse offensively for Arizona to have Mathis and his 50 to 60 WRC plus in there compared to Avila, who actually is a pretty good hitter against righties. He's above 100 WRC plus most years. This year he struggled a little bit, but it's still a better matchup for Strasburg with Avila out of the lineup, and Jake Lamb's on the DL. So yeah, I have no interest in offense in that game, and it's a really good spot for Strasburg. But getting back to the Tigers-Orioles game, the Tigers are priced up, and I think it's going to keep their ownership down a decent amount just because they don't fit as easily into lineups as some of the other offenses that we like and some other cheaper offenses. So I don't think it's going to be a crazy amount of ownership on Detroit. There were a couple concerns here. One is that Chris Tillman just won't pitch for very long. So then the bullpen could come in. The Orioles don't have a good bullpen, but any reliever is better than Chris Tillman. So it becomes less strong of a matchup throughout the game, as opposed to the other side where the Tigers don't have a good bullpen either, but it's a worse bullpen than Baltimore's. The Orioles maybe even get a boost when the Tigers bullpen starts to come in. So for that reason, I favor the Orioles because the bullpen of Detroit is worse than the bullpen of Baltimore. But the pricing is an issue, definitely. And then there's also that Miguel Cabrera and Victor Martinez are both first basemen. So you can't make stacks on DraftKings that include both of them. And that's probably their second and third best hitters after Nick Castellanos. So it's just kind of annoying from a stacking perspective that you can't maximize upside by having two of the better hitters in a lineup together. So even with all of that, I still like the Tigers a lot. But if the circumstances were a little better and they were a little cheaper, they'd be by far my favorite offense against Chris Tillman, who's probably the worst pitcher in all of baseball. Considering all of these other negative factors, though, I kind of just plan on having them the same amount as some of these other strong offenses.
Yeah, I'm certainly, in agreement with you. I think the Reds are my favorite offense just from the way they fit. You can build lineups with both DeGrom and Strasburg and fit the top five of the Reds with, about 3K for, the three remaining positions. And I think, they're inarguably just as strong as the spot to, produce as many runs as the Tigers or Orioles going in Minnesota. The wind is kind of blowing out to right field at 14 miles per hour. So it is kind of a boost for all the left-handers. And, Joey Votto is the only expensive one at 4.1K, and that, it's still a bit underpriced for this matchup against Phil Hughes, who's, just as bad as Mike Fiers, probably not as bad as, Chris Tillman.
Well, part of the reason that I prefer the Orioles to the Reds is that Mike Fiers has been a reverse splits pitcher for his whole career, and the Orioles are reverse splits offense where their righties hit righties better than they hit lefties. So Fiers for his career has a 438 FIP and 407 xFIP against righties, 411 FIP and 398 xFIP against lefties. And he's just overall been worse than that in recent years. This year, his ERA is below 4, but his peripherals suggest he's been getting pretty lucky. And Fiers is also really homer prone. I guess Phil Hughes is too. So I like the Reds for sure. I like the Orioles, though, maybe a little bit more because I think they have more power hitters and the platoon splits maybe just favor them a little more. Top to bottom, the Reds are probably a little cheaper. But I think combo stacks here are the way to go. Like the Reds are batting Jose Peraza second, and he's a shortstop. But Peraza is definitely the worst hitter in the top half of the Reds lineup, probably the worst hitter in their lineup overall outside of Billy Hamilton. So you can put Manny Machado into Red stacks or make Orioles stacks that you plug in the Reds guys. I think these are two teams that make a lot of sense to combine. But Trey Mancini is a really strong value. Adam Jones is a really strong value. I think you can use Danny Valencia, even though he's right-handed. He's 2,700. Caleb Joseph, 2,500. That's pretty cheap for a catcher. And Joseph's a decent hitter. So it's hard to have too much conviction on which of these offenses is in a better spot because they're all in great spots. So I guess on a normal slate, I would just be making 5-man stacks and then just plugging in whatever 3 other batters fit. But for a slate like this, I think I would do a lot of 4 and 4 stacks or 5 and 3 stacks where you really try to get hitters just from these 3 offenses, because I do think these 3 offenses are in much stronger spots than the rest of the teams on the slate.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you. I don't really have much else to add on any of these other teams. I did mention the Cardinals earlier. You kind of talked about the weather, but I think Steven Brault is, a very bad pitcher. And the Cardinals, they're kind of expensive, but they're a very right-handed heavy, team. And just about 1 through 7 has, home run hitting upside against a pitcher who has given up, a fair amount of power to right-handers to start this season. Yeah, are the Cardinals the team you're looking to stack, or are they more of plugs around the other guys if they just happen to fit?
Well, I think it's a decent spot for them, but there's 14 games on the slate. Okay, wait, where's the volume coming from now? Am I getting an echo? Okay, never mind. There's 14 games on the slate, and it's a decent spot. It's just I think the Reds, Orioles, and Tigers are in so much better spots that they're not a good enough choice, I think, to roster them too much. I do like Tommy Pham, but he's really expensive. So the deal with Steven Brault, I don't know why it's echoing like this. I'll just keep talking. The deal with Brault is that he walks a lot of guys. I don't think he's nearly as homer prone as Fiers or Tillman or Hughes, and it's a National League park. So the Cardinals are okay. I kind of just think they're okay. Pham is just a little expensive. I think Jose Martinez is a good plug, but I'd rather use Cabrera. I'd rather use Victor Martinez. So they're just less good of a choice. I probably won't have them too much, but I think they're okay. Other teams that are semi-interesting, the Indians against Erasmo Ramirez. Ramirez is not very good, and he's homer prone. The Indians' offense is reasonably cheap. So I think Brantley's a good plug. I think Kipnis is a good plug. I think Ramirez and Lindor, if you can pay up for them. Especially Ramirez, because Lindor is a shortstop, and I definitely prefer Manny Machado. So I won't have too much Lindor, but I think Ramirez, Kipnis, Brantley are good plugs. I wouldn't have too much of Edwin and Alonso because, again, Miggy, Victor Martinez, and Joey Votto are just better plays, I think. And then the other game we mentioned last night, the Dodgers-Giants game, I think Dodgers righties for sure against Derek Holland. I don't have a ton of interest in stacking them. It is a pitcher's park in San Francisco, even though it is better for righties than for lefties because the fence is shorter in left field and righties can pull the ball to left field more easily for home runs. But from the Giants side, I do still like Andrew McCutchen and Buster Posey. They're just better hitters than what their prices are, and I think Hyunjin Ryu is just overrated by his price tag by a lot. So McCutchen's my favorite overall player from that San Francisco game, but I think Posey, Chris Taylor, Kike Hernandez, Matt Kemp if he's starting, maybe Austin Barnes at catcher. I think all those guys are good plays, but the San Francisco game, I think I'll just be using plugs and really just sticking to stacking the Reds, the Tigers, and the Orioles.
Yeah. So that about does it for today. Are there any questions on YouTube or last-minute questions on Slack for us?
No, and I guess I normally run through a list of plugs, but I'm really just trying to make combo stacks today because I think these three teams are in such good offensive spots. So I won't be using plugs really from other games too much, but I'll just quickly scan to see if there are any good ones. Because we do have a bunch of lineups that have come out, and then I guess we'll just sign off. I don't really think there are too many good value plays across the board. See, yeah, all the value is just on the Orioles, the Tigers, and the Reds. So there's not really too much in terms of additional value. I think Jerks and Profar batting third at 2,900 with dual position eligibility is a good play. In lineups that don't have Pomerantz, I think you can use Matt Duffy leading off. Wilson Ramos is batting fourth. I think he's pretty good at catcher. And then, let's see, the Marlins are a little bit cheap. I think you can plug in some Marlins. Martin Prado is second and third base eligible. He's off the DL today. And he's batting second at 3,000. So I like Prado, Kipnis, and Brantley I mentioned. I don't know. Are there any other plugs that jump out to you, or do you think that mostly covers it?
Yeah, that mostly covers it. I'm Kipnis, like you said. I'm primarily sticking to those three teams. I do like the Cardinals a little bit as plugs. Gyorgo, we used him, a couple nights ago against the left-hander. He teed off. The Marlins, like you said, Castro hitting third, 3,200. But, yeah, the primary targets today are clearly in that Baltimore game and the Reds against Phil Hughes.
All right, there's only one other player that I think Greg and I maybe talked about on the podcast last night, or maybe it was right after we finished. Yoenis Cespedes is 4,100 in San Diego, which isn't really a pitcher's park anymore, and Clayton Richard is left-handed. So Cespedes is underpriced for his home run upside, and it's a left-handed pitcher who's not that good. So I like Cespedes as really the only hitter to have interest in from that game. Yeah, that just about does it. I think unless anyone else has questions, that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah, that about wraps it up for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, I believe, for one of the slates. But if you are looking for quality content or just a friendly DFS home, visit RotoPros.com. We have everything covered from every sport and every platform. Check us out, like our show, and comment, review. Anything helps. Thanks.